Yes, hello. My name is Dalton Mortimer. I am the Authenticator, and I am back. And it has been a fuck of a long time, but never you mind that. I will cover that in the next video I release, hopefully. I'm aware this is the first video I've made in a while, and I'm also aware that I've been away for a fuck of a long time. But that's neither here nor there. And to start off with, this isn't the first video I wanted to make on my attempt to come back to the YouTubes. But since my Dr. Random McCam response video went so well, I figured since Kyle Kulinski said something uncharacteristically stupid of him, I would try my hand at responding to him, even though I don't expect it'll go anywhere near as well. To start off with, let's get this out of the way right now. I was a Bernie Sanders supporter both times Bernie Sanders ran for the presidency. And my second and third choices this time around were Andrew Yang and Tulsi Gabbard. And next time around, whenever the chance comes around again, I would very much like if Tulsi and Andrew ran again, and also, preferably, Ro Khanna would be my choice as, like, the next Bernie Sanders, if you like. Furthermore, I like Kyle. He's probably one of my favorite news YouTubers, and I go to him on a daily basis for a lot of shit, because he's good at his job. But, being that, however it may, you should also be aware that I am not against calling people who I like out when I think they're in danger of saying or doing stupid shit. And in this case, I think Kyle might be in danger of endangering his most sane left-wing commentator on YouTube and most sane of the Young Turks Network position here. Because Kyle, for better or worse, has a blind spot. And that blind spot, of course, being ANTIFA. Every time they've come up in the news since their inception, basically, Kyle has found a way to be not only the most charitable way he possibly could be towards them, but also, frankly, kind of disingenuously naive about the whole thing. And I don't think he intended to be, but the chips are what they are. Normally this takes the form of just one or two bad takes every now and again, buttressed by a fuck ton of cognitive dissonance and some way over being overly charitable. But it's usually within the realms of reasonable, and I can see how he arrived at them. But, well, normally I'm more than willing to just let the mistakes fall where they may, click dislike on a few videos, and leave maybe a comment explaining why I think he's lost his marbles on this one particular topic. Today, he said something on another level, and it genuinely makes me think that he is abjectly blind here, so here I am. So a few minutes ago, well, actually, probably maybe an hour, as of recording this, Kyle releases a video wherein he talks about how Fox News is spinning quote-unquote propaganda about how much of a shithole the Seattle Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone is, the Chaz. And this is, not unreasonable, because of course Fox News are largely morons, just like MSNBC and CNN are also morons, in the same way that neocons and neolibs. Two idiotic halves of a mindlessly normative corporate shilling paradigm. We know this. The old paradigm is dead, and the establishment needs to get the fuck on board with this. This is nothing but Kyle's standard line of thinking, and it's one I wholeheartedly fucking agree with. But then he starts describing the people who set up the Chaz, and a little yellow flag in the back of my mind pops up. Because he describes them basically as silly people letting off steam. And while this is true, it's trivially true, they are silly people letting off steam, he goes on to say how that basically means that they have done no major harm and that they're not in any way dangerous or threatening or even violent. And, yeah, no, Kyle, no, very much wrong. But anyway, so if that was all that was in this video, I wouldn't be making this video. But then he starts to describe how Fox News is handling it, and given that Fox News is the opposition network, and they've been mindlessly droning on about ridiculously conservative bullshit since the 90s, it's unsurprising that they're being a little bit alarmist about it. But the thing is, sometimes people are alarmist for good goddamn reason. And, there are plenty of people on Fox News, like Tucker Carlson, who can occasionally get shit right. Kyle knows this is about as well as I know this. And yet, he starts droning on about how it's unreasonable to call the people who run the chairs violent anarcho-communists. And this sort of bridges into my larger issues whenever he covers Antifa. So I guess in order to make this video somewhat listenable, I might as well get some of those issues off my chest while I'm here, because they are at least a little bit relevant to the topic at hand. I'm just not going to spend so long on it because it's not really the issue. Dearest Kyle, let's get this one out of the way, but quick. But they're anti-fascist, herder. Kyle, just because someone calls themselves something does not mean that the thing that they are calling themselves precludes them from being bad people. I know it's become a cliche to do this, but if you look, for example, at George Orwell's 1984, the Ministry of Truth, Ministry of Peace, and Ministry of Justice spring to mind. Truth, peace, and justice are very, inherently good and desirable things, yes? But if you look at the actual definitions that those people are playing with, then you become acutely aware that they are not for good things, even if they themselves believe that they are fighting for those very same values. You can fight for a value and be missing the mark. You can be fighting for a value and be in the wrong direction. You can be fighting for a value and be doing the wrong thing in pursuit of that value. But incidentally, this goes into the other thing. How do we know they're anarcho-communist, derp? Okay, Kyle. Their flags are black and red. Black and red symbolism usually relates to either anarcho-communism or anarcho-syndicalism, depending on the order of the colors in the color scheme. Anarcho-communism and anarcho-syndicalism are very, very similar, so much so that to split hairs about the definitions between them would be basically academic woo. But here is the kicker, Kyle, and this is the thing that relates to both of them. They can be fighting their definition of fascism, but as with the name thing, you can't tell these things based on just what people call themselves. You have to look at their actual definitions. And therein lies the problem. Let me explain. To a significant proportion of these people, I'm not going to say all, I'm not even going to say most, but to a significant proportion of them, and mind you, several of these people are professors and or grad students, therefore they should know this terminology by goddamn now, they consider capitalism to be either a means to the end of fascism, a stepping stone to fascism, or a kind of soft-core fascism. Because these people consider anarchy, and specifically anarcho-communism, to be the solution to all of these issues. Essentially, in the minds of a lot of these people, any kind of hierarchy is inherently basically soft-core fascism. And there, precisely, lies the goddamn problem. Because they use the term anti-fascist, we think of them fighting, self-identifying Nazis and self-identifying fascists and so on and so forth. But in actuality, in a lot of cases, they fight capitalistic liberal Western democracies. And as per the famous quote, liberals get the bullet too, because liberalism itself is considered a stepping stone to fascism by a significant proportion of these people. Do you see what I mean now about why it's important to draw a distinction between the terminology and labels of something and the substantive definitions of something? They are anti-fascist in a context that conflates fascism with capitalism, liberalism, Western democracies, and eventually any kind of hierarchy. And that's fucking moronic, do you see? They're opposing a lot of things that opposed Nazism and fascism, for example, under the rubric of fighting fascism, which is inherently kind of stupid. But that's neither here nor there, and that basically sums up my reason why I beat my head against the proverbial brick wall every time Kyle covers these issues. Because he can't see past but they're fighting bad people. Yes, Kyle, they are fighting bad people or people you might find disagreeable, but they're doing so in a context which itself should be not condoned and should be disavowed at the very least. It's kind of like when Bernie Sanders calls himself a democratic socialist, when you and I both know he's just a garden variety social democrat, and then some people take that and run with it, and some people take that and run with it all the way to he's basically a softcore communist, to basically disown him. The terms and labels people use are nowhere near as important as the substance of their definitions, their context, and the overall philosophical frameworks they're operating under. You should know this by now, Kyle, but every time ANTIFA comes up, you seem to plumb forget this. Most of the people who have been either revealed to be Antifa members or have self-identified as Antifa members will freely tell you they are anarcho-communists, and yet somehow every time but it's just fighting fascism though. Basically right here we have a demonstration of why it is always important in philosophical conversations to define your terms. When someone says, I'm an anti-fascist, your first question should be, what do you mean by fascism, and how exactly do you go about opposing it? Because if your definition of fascism is different from the standard definition of fascism, or you include a bunch of things in that standard definition that don't belong there, or are shoehorned in there, then that changes the game somewhat significantly now, doesn't it? But I digress a little bit, because like I said, this video is supposed to be in a response to a video that he released today, and while I think how he always seems to handle Antifa is relevant to that conversation, it's only incidental to the overall conversation. But that was just me providing context for basically every time when he covers Antifa, how I beat my head against the proverbial brick wall. And it seems like he's going to be covering it a lot more now that we have the post-COVID protests and or riots going on. So yeah, on to the actual issue of today and what made me go from Kyle is wrong here, but I can exercise this knowledge by just leaving a dislike or a comment to this needs to be a video right fucking now because this is beyond the pale. This is some next level shit right here. So anyway, Kyle goes on to talk about basically the two stereotypes that Fox News and their ilk have of the left. Either as hypersensitive snowflake college kids who are identity obsessed or, basically pathetic soy boys, or as violent anarcho-communistic revolutionaries who are dangerous and will destroy shit. And then he goes on to basically follow that to its, logical conclusion, and I agree that the extremist way that Fox News goes about this is probably misleading, but obviously that's true. Duh. The part where my ears perk up in a confused rage and that yet previously yellow flag I was sporting turns to a vibrant red is when Kyle basically says these two stereotypes, the stereotype of, unself-aware, identity-obsessed, middle-class to upper-middle-class, college-educated brats looking to LARP as revolutionaries with daddy's trust fund, and violent anarcho-communists who are dangerously and mindlessly destroying shit. Kyle says that these two stereotypes oppose each other, and that's a sign that Fox News is off the mark. Kyle, how is your brain doing that? These are anything but mutually exclusive. Because it's... Okay, Kyle. The reason why, and you go on later in the video to explain that you see more of the first half of that the first half of those criteria in the group and not the second half, is because it is exactly those types of people who transition from one of those to the other, i.e., privileged, sheltered, unself-aware, and people who are unaware of their surroundings, college brats looking to LARP as revolutionaries, are exactly the kind of people who basically either evolve or devolve, depending on how you look at it, into violent anarcho-communists. The thing that makes these people dangerous is their lack of self-awareness and their inherent entitlement. Because the lack of self-awareness that leads someone into narcissistic, navel-gazing identity politics is also the lack of self-awareness that leads to dangerous anarcho-communism, do you see? That's the thing. Dangerous anarcho-communism is a natural outgrowth of identity-obsessed wankery. Because if you are sheltered and you grow up in a world with no consequences, then you may do otherwise unthinkable shit because you don't understand that the world has consequences. This is why the aristocracy is dangerous, and this is why the aristocracy is also so incredibly foppish, because they live in a world without the consequences that the rest of us have to deal with, and therefore they consider things to be reasonable that any thinking person with a sense of consequence knows is not. Do you see? And also, if you are emotionally sheltered from the time you are a child to the time you are a, champagne-swilling, college-educated, neo-communist brat, then anything that does stretch you out is going to hurt you more, because you're not used to having to process emotions. If you're not used to pain, then the first pain you experience will be the worst pain you ever experience, and therefore you will react as though you've been tortured when in actuality you've just been punched. If you've never been punched in the face, and that first punch in the face will make you react as though someone has run over you with a truck. And therein lies the issue. They're not mutually exclusive stereotypes, Kyle. They are an extension of each other. Put another way, the reason why this is possibly the stupidest thing that Kyle has ever said is because not only are these things not mutually exclusive, and not only can they exist within the mind of the same person, but they actively support each other's... Each part of this framework supports the other. Meaning that when times are good and the person in question is not under stress, all they're going to be is the annoying, hypersensitive, safe space college kid LARPing with daddy's trust fund while being blissfully unaware of their own financial privilege. But when that person is put under any kind of stress, they consider the only reasonable reaction to be violent anarcho-communism, because they believe in the ideology and they have no sense of scale. They've been harmed, and so they are going to harm in turn. But because they have no sense of scale, they're going to do horrible things. Sense of scale therefore their reactions are going to have a disproportionate level of indignation, and said disproportionate level of indignation is going to lead to disproportionate actions, which, in the context of if the person's actions were proportional, would make perfect sense, but because they're not, they don't. In short, people with no self-awareness are dangerous because they're stupid, and stupidity left to its own devices leads to crazy shit. It could... I've often thought that maybe evil is just what happens when stupidity and lack of self-awareness is left to its own devices and allowed to go to its natural conclusion. Kyle, you know that incompetence is a dangerous thing, right? Just because they are whiny leftist college kids wanting to blow off steam doesn't mean that that steam can't take the form of violently destroying shit. Because if the steam is not handled well, it can go very, very badly, do you see? Yes, even when it's weak, pathetic people. How? Especially when it's weak, pathetic people. Because weak, pathetic people tend to be even more incompetent. It's kind of like how Trump is perfectly okay when he's just a reality star buffoon, as you put it, but when he's put in charge of history's largest empire and handed the keys to the nuclear button, we all sweat a little bit. Well, when rich, white, sheltered kids with no sense of scale, pain, or self-awareness are applying their talents to dealing with safe spaces and trigger warnings and so forth, nobody really needs to bat that much of an eye, even though they can have negative consequences if left to their own devices. But when they decide we're going to apply this economically and become anarcho-communists and destroy shit because civilization isn't to our liking and we have no sense of how to do anything properly, we should actually get quite worried, because if they're left to their own devices, we're fucked, Kyle. And what we're seeing in the Chaz and what we're seeing in a lot of these protests being turned into riots by ANTIFA and other anarcho-communists is that fallout. In other words, it's a common cliche that the road to evil is paved with good intentions. And when that paving is left up to the charge of people who don't know a damn thing about paving roads in the first place, it's going to go even worse than it otherwise would. Sheltered morons are not undangerous specifically because they are sheltered morons. They're, in fact, even more dangerous because they're sheltered morons. Especially if they're rich sheltered morons because they can get away with shit. It's a bit like how you might laugh at children playing, I don't know, cops and robbers. But when those children become adults and they've been sheltered to the point that they never grew out of playing cops and robbers, what happens when that game of cops and robbers transitions to a very real world with very real weaponry and a very real infrastructure that's getting fucked in the ass because of these people trying to apply a reality that is not so to a reality that very much is. Kyle. Likewise, Kyle, you might not find it harmless. You might find it harmless when it's authoritarian college kids dictating on social issues in the, safe spaces of universities and corporations and shit. But when that same fervor gets turned on to something that can actually do sincere harm, and that same lack of self-awareness and that same framework and mindset of give me what I want because daddy never told me no gets applied, you honestly don't see how that's related to dangerous, violent revolutionaries, especially given when revolutions and social movements are incompetent, shit gets blown up, as we've seen. That's, I guess, the end of my point, but yeah, I guess I'll transition to the end. Sorry about that, folks. I know I restated the same point about 50 times, but I couldn't really figure out how to put into words exactly what I was thinking, so I tried to put it in as many different ways as possible, hoping that one of them would get through to my points. That point being, essentially, Kyle, you're not going to see these people, you're not going to see those two stereotypes in separate people. If anything, you're going to see them be the same people, and that's why I think you're confused, because you're not expecting violent revolutionaries to come from the mindsets of privileged neo-aristocratic college kids. But that's exactly where they are going to come from, because incompetence coupled with moral fervor and a lack of self-awareness and a lack of external awareness is going to ruin the world. And that's exactly why you can't see separate people when you're looking for them, because they're not separate people. These two mindsets can exist in the same mind at once, and they in fact follow naturally from each other if you're not careful. But yeah, that's I guess my 2 cents on the matter. This was hopefully a minor black spot on Kyle's record, and I want him to do well in future. But yeah, I'm really, really hoping this doesn't completely fucking suck. But hey, at least I'm back, and at least I did another response video, which seems to go well for me. Until next time, guys, cheers, and I will see you next time. I have been Dalton Mortimer. I have been the Authenticator. And with any luck, this will be the first in a new stream of videos. But until we can figure that out, once again, cheers, guys.